Today on the HopeFilled Financial Podcast, I'm going to start by telling a physics joke that I promised last week. And yes, it does tie into the topic of money and marriage. Our budget tip today is going to cover hospitality and how to include it in your budget. Our question of the day is going to focus on social pressures to eat out when it's not in your budget. Last but not least, our main topic is going to be reviewing an article that says there are 5 good reasons to keep your money separate in marriage. Strap in, I get a feeling that this is an example of some of the bad advice you can find on the internet. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled Financial Coach, and I'm very happy that you're here with us today. As promised last week, I'm going to tell you about a joke that I used to tell when I was a physics tutor in college. While the joke itself was used to help people remember physics stuff for their test, I related the physics material in question to relationships. Even if you're not all that interested in physics, this particular example is one that I think anyone can understand, and I think it's one that you're going to enjoy. Now, if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, where we have the podcast with videos, I'm going to have some little visual aids that I'll describe as we go along. I have a couple computer cables here that were just sitting around my office, so I'm going to be holding those in front of me. Right now, I have a white wire and a black wire held in front of me. And we're going to assume that they're straight, and they're also simple conductors. They're not complicated computer wires. And I want you to imagine that there's current flowing through each one of these wires so that I can explain the physics joke. Let's assume that they're both flowing from my left hand to my right hand. I'm holding them in front of me so that they're horizontal. If the currents in both wires are flowing in the same direction, well, each one of these is going to be generating a magnetic field that circulates around the wire. And it goes around the wire based on the right-hand rule. So if you stick your thumb in the direction that current goes and curl your fingers around, then the direction that your fingers curl is the direction of the magnetic field. Using a similar right-hand rule, you'd be able to calculate the force between the magnetic field generated by one wire and the current flowing in the other. Ultimately, if you do the physics right, what you find is that when the current in both wires is going in the same direction, the wires feel an attractive force, and they come together. However, if the currents are going in opposite directions, the wires experience repulsive forces, and they force each other apart. When I would explain this physical property to students who were studying physics, I would say, well, when the currents are going in the same direction, they come together because they see their futures going together. They have the same mutual path. They have the same goals, and they come together and stay together forever. Isn't that beautiful? Then I would switch over and say, if the currents are going in opposite directions in the wires, they experience forces that separate them and send them in different directions because they see their futures not necessarily going in the same way, but they understand they have differences and they don't necessarily need to have a mutual future. After explaining this under my breath, I would say, and this is the reaction that I get from every girl that I've ever tried to talk to. This would often get a laugh and help them remember the material on exams. I remember getting some students who would write down quotes from my jokes on their exams, and when they'd get the exam back, they'd show it to me and say, look, I was able to remember this. Now that I'm a financial coach, I look at this as a different sort of metaphor. If I were to tell the joke again, instead of beating up on myself, I would say that when your values and your virtues are flowing in the same direction and you work on finding common ground, you work on having that mutual vision for the future, it helps you come together as a married couple and grow closer together. Meanwhile, if you hold separate views, separate values that you would judge each other for, things that you don't necessarily approve the other of having, well, your currents, your values are somewhat going in opposite directions. And if you do that enough when it comes to the way that you spend your money, it can drive you apart. And that's one way that we can understand how money works in a negative way to tear marriages apart when not managed properly. Whether you're a believer or not, the Bible talks about the wisdom where your money lies, where your treasure lies, there your heart will be also. Ultimately, where we spend our money is a representation of our priorities, especially if we're being very intentional with our spending with the budget. We allocate money according to our values, according to our needs. But then with our wants, we're basically voting with our money as to what matters to us. And within marriage, if your votes aren't compatible with each other and you're not talking about those votes so that the other understands where your values lie and learns how to respect them instead of judge them, well, that's when you end up with that problem and the forces pull things apart. I want you to keep this in mind later when we get to the main topic. But for now, it's time for today's budget tip. When you are budgeting, if you host people and you have guests who come over regularly or family who visits often, there's going to be expense associated with that, be it providing meals or going out and finding some sort of entertainment to have fun. When you have those sorts of expenses, if you don't have a category that allows you to isolate those sorts of expenses and to have a plan for them, well, it might feel like when people come over to visit or you invite them over, that it's messing up your budget, that the expenses that could be incurred or are going to be incurred they're not perfectly compatible in any other place. So you kind of leave them out, you kind of give yourself a little slop and say it'll fit in here. But it's really helpful to give them a name. It kind of gives you permission to host people and engage more socially in a way that helps you flourish with your relationships in the way that you would like to, so that you don't feel restricted from them because you have a budget. I simply have, under giving, a subcategory called hospitality. Most of the time, that's going to be bonus grocery money for when we have people coming over and we're going to the store so that we can make something for our guests who are coming over to visit. For us lately on our hospitality line, we're adding about 8 to 12% of our overall food and grocery budget, and that particular amount seems to be giving us enough permission that we feel free and loving whenever we're hosting friends and family at our home. Now it's time to answer a question submitted by you. Today's question comes from Chris. Chris asks, my coworkers want to eat out constantly, but it's not in my budget. Help. Okay, Chris, this is something that I ran into. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know one of my early stories was how I didn't have a budget. And my first month or so, when I was out at my first job out of college, I ended up eating out a lot for lunch. And I ended up buying a whole lot of groceries that went bad because I didn't have a meal plan and I didn't have a budget. And I was also spending with a credit card. The combination of all these things meant that I was spending about double what my family consumes now. That aside, you say in your question that I don't have the eating out in the budget. I see this playing out with two scenarios. Scenario one, you have the discretionary money to go eat out if you wanted to, at least in part. And you're not assigning that money to eating out because you have another priority that is a want that you believe is more important than eating out with the coworkers. In that case, when you say no to coworkers and say, I can't eat out, well, you're saying it for the sake of the want that you have that is more important to you than eating out. And knowing that can help give you the power to say no. Now, if you don't have a priority that is more important to you and you really want to engage in that social aspect of going out and eating lunch, you are in a place financially where you can afford it, you have that discretionary income to do so, well, just put it in the budget. Have an eating outline item or even one that is lunch with office friends. Add that to your budget and give yourself a limit. You know roughly how often people are going to be wanting to go out for lunch, and you know how much you can afford to if you're writing a monthly budget. In that case, you're going to be giving yourself permission to say yes often and no once you've hit the limit for the month. Let's consider scenario number two. Scenario number two is you do not have discretionary income to be eating out. You have a priority that is so large and it's taking up all of your otherwise discretionary money. Say it's getting out of debt. You want to get out of debt. You know that needs to be your financial priority. And it's really hard to stay focused on getting out of debt when all your friends want to do at work, all your coworkers want to do is go out and eat and hang out. And you're like, this is expensive. This is going to add so much more to what I spend on food to feed myself. Well, you need to first recognize that eating out with the friends, eating out with your coworkers is not a need. Eating out is a want. You can take a brown paper sack lunch that you prepped at home and have an appropriate meal plan that costs a fraction of what it would eating out. You need to know that your plan to pay off debt or whatever your major priority is now, your need that exists now, that is taking over the priority of eating out. You need to know that By accomplishing that, you're freeing yourself up to say yes a lot more later and say yes in a way that's not going to make you feel guilty. And there's room to do that without having to go out and break the bank or break your budget. I hope this answer helps you, Chris. And if this is something that you still continue to struggle with or you have more questions on this topic, please feel free to reach out to me. This is what I do as a financial coach. I help people understand their needs, their wants, their goals, and their priorities, help them to know when to say yes, help them know when to say no, and help them realize that saying no with a budget is not necessarily saying no, it's simply saying not yet. With that, it's time to move on to today's main topic. For today's main topic, I'm covering an article that was published by Money Under 30. This particular article, I'm not sponsored to read at all. And even if I was, I don't think that they're going to be very happy with what I have to say, as the title of this article is 5 Reasons You Should Keep Your Finances Separate from Your Significant Other and 4 Reasons You Shouldn't. Now, last week, from the Investopedia article, we covered the different ways that newlyweds can manage money with joint accounts, separate accounts, or some sort of mix in between. And I think I was pretty clear with my opinion. I'm a huge proponent of joint accounts in the majority of situations. The situations that I've seen where joint accounts really doesn't work is if one spouse is mentally ill or incapable of managing money due to something that is diagnosable and they have a doctor's note about, hey, you really shouldn't be responsible for the money. And the other spouse either has like power of attorney over their money or needs to be taking the reins and be responsible for the two of them because they're just simply not capable of managing it. But if both spouses are fully capable of engaging with money management, I strongly recommend joining accounts because it's the kind of thing that helps your currents go together, keep your values together. It helps you minimize judgment and helps your hearts grow together. With that in mind, we're going to jump into the article, and I'm going to do my best to not get too fired up. Okay, the article starts with some bold text on the top that reads, while most couples end up merging finances, that doesn't make it right for everyone. Here are 5 reasons why holding off might be the smarter money-saving move. All right, let's see what they say. Generally speaking, the vast majority of couples, even unmarried couples, share at least one joint bank account. I hate to stop already, but they mention here that those who are unmarried sharing joint accounts is something that happens. I want to clarify my position. I do not promote the idea of joining accounts before you are married with your significant other. The reason being, legally speaking, is joining accounts gets really messy when you don't have the legal binding and the legal backing of marriage behind you. So you might end up sharing an account or sharing a house or whatever it was that you jointly owned unmarried with a would-be in-law had you been married. So to be clear, you join accounts only after you get married. Until then, everything does indeed stay separate. I'm going to continue with the article now. But that does not mean it's the right move for you. In fact, there are some pretty powerful reasons why you shouldn't merge finances with your partner, at least not yet. Contrary to its core mission, merging your finances could lead to more financial stress, fights, and even jeopardize your credit score. Again, with the credit score, putting credit score above relationship. Heavy stuff, I know, but relationships get stronger when you face the heavy stuff sooner. Agreed. I really do agree with that. So, without further ado, let's explore 5 reasons why you should keep finances separate from your significant other. Number 1, prevent the group project mentality. I wonder what they mean by that. We've all been in that group project where at least one person totally checks out and leaves the bulk of the responsibility to others. If you're not watching on YouTube, they have a GIF of someone totally peacing out and then disappearing from a school desk or something. Unfortunately, that tends to happen in groups of 2 as well, even if they love each other. Once there's a joint account where couples pool money, it's fairly common for one half of the relationship to become the money manager, while the other person loses focus, tunes out, and makes mistakes. It often happens subconsciously, but the end result is the same: conflict. The money manager has the added stress of managing finances for 2 people now, and occasionally feels the need to deliver an uncomfortable lecture. In some cases, the less engaged half of the relationship may even start making less money. overestimating how much their partner is willing to take care of the finances. That's not to say having one household money manager or breadwinner can't work, but keeping separate accounts can help you avoid this stress and conflict in the first place. Oh, where to begin with this? If you go back and you listen to episode 20, I describe how to make budgeting easy in marriage. And part of the thing when you're married is there's one person who's typically more nerdy, more in tune with managing numbers, spreadsheets, and budgets, and the other one is a little bit more of a free spirit, more of a natural, spontaneous person who doesn't enjoy planning as much. And it's not to say that one personality is better than the other. They have their pros and their cons, their strengths and their weaknesses, and together they make a full team. What they're talking about here is how one spouse, the nerd, typically ends up taking the reins. The problem is if the nerd completely leaves the free spirit out of the budgeting process, it is perfectly fine for the nerd to be the main money manager, as they refer to them. I call them the budget drafter, the person who drafts the budget, who comes up with the overall plan and takes the extra time that the free spirit does not care about away from them. At the budget meeting, after the budget is drafted, they come together and they agree on the plan. They talk through it as quickly as possible, and the free spirit provides input. That way, they maintain a level of investment in their financial plan, and they get to understand where they are as a couple with their future financial goals. The problem here is they're basically saying if you have two people, one person who likes running the budget and one person who doesn't like running the budget, you're going to end up with this team group mentality where the free spirit completely tunes out and adds a great deal more stress to the nerd. You need to have some sort of structure to help you communicate about money in a healthy way so that you can both stay on the same page. Not that the work is equal when it comes to the money management. It's not going to be equal. You're going to be dealing with this stuff in different ways. And it's important to figure out how to communicate about this stuff so that you don't end up feeling like you have to lecture the other person on how to be financially responsible and avoid spending on this, or no, we can't be saving on that. If you manage things completely separately, it leaves room for judging the other who would be tuned out and feel lost and stressed because they absolutely hate running numbers and budgets. And you have the other person over here who's doing just an excellent job, like, ooh, I am doing so much better than my spouse on this. I have figured it out. They really need to grow up and figure this stuff out. It's not a matter of growing up. It really isn't. Shame if you are putting your spouse in a situation where you can hold yourself above them because you think you're financially superior in your management of money. Okay, breathe. We're going to move on to number 2. Fewer fights and surprises. Now, they've got some back and forth dialogue here. I'm going to start with saying, "Hey, babe, FYI, I'm getting my hair done at Serena's next Tuesday." "Serena? Doesn't she charge like $120? I was saving up for something." "You mean a PlayStation 5? Can't it wait another 2 weeks? Why is it always me who has to wait until our next paycheck?" When you have your significant other choose to share a combined pool of money, fights can sometimes break out over how to spend it and when. These can often be exacerbated when one partner doesn't understand or value what the other is trying to spend money on. One spouse might be trying to get a nice haircut to impress the other's parents, while the spouse who's saving up for the PlayStation 5 is just trying to de-stress after the job that they have so that they can play online with their nephew. But without transparency and communication, both partners may feel like the other is spending their shared money superfluously. A 2012 study published in the journal Family Relations found that financial disagreements were the number one predictor of divorce. That's not to say that sharing finances inherently raises or lowers your chances of separating, but rather that you should carefully consider whether sharing accounts will lead to more or less fighting. Okay, in the example that they gave, there's a disagreement that spontaneously comes up in the middle of the month. "Hey, I'm going to go get this expensive haircut, but I'm saving for something else," and instant conflict. The problem here isn't that they're managing money together. The problem here is that they do not have a mutual plan. They don't have a budget. They are not communicating about their goals with money. So they're just simply letting their own ideas stew and battle it out every time that they want to do something. And it becomes a conversation then and there. And they have to expel so much more energy throughout the month every time an expense more than $20 pops up. Now, if you had a budget, it would resolve everything whether they were managing money together or separate. And budgeting is going to be way easier when you're spending from one source and your accounts are joint because you can see how everything is working together in a simpler way. We talked about that last week. And yes, money fights and money problems are the number one leading cause of divorce, according to that study. But it's also true that simply thinking that your spouse spends money foolishly is the greatest predictor that you're going to separate later, according to another. The one that I think is the most powerful predictor of a couple that is on the rocks with their finances, the judgment that can be held. And that judgment can only be held when you're not mutually agreeing on a plan. If you sat down and ran a budget in the situation they gave, you might have enough money to do the haircut and the PlayStation. You just might have to cut out your eating out a little bit in order to accommodate both. And you need to recognize that a super expensive haircut and a PlayStation are both wants. This gives an opportunity when you have the budget for spouses to say, I care about the haircut. Well, I care about this PlayStation. I don't understand why you care about the haircut. And I don't understand why you care about the PlayStation. But I need to know, how much do you value it relative to this thing that we value together? And when is it that we're going to be willing to make these things happen? It's not a matter of no. You don't tell each other no. You tell each other when, not yet. You come up with a mutual plan of when you can both engage with your wants. And sometimes you can afford a very expensive haircut. Sometimes maybe not this month. It depends on your other goals and your mutually agreed upon plan for money. You will feel so much more known if you do this budgeting thing together. Let's move on to number 3. One's a saver, one's a spender. This is another dichotomy very similar to the nerd and the free spirit, the spender and the saver. Now, the nerd, you might obviously assign the role of being the saver and the free spirit, the spender, but it can be vice versa. I am the nerd, I'm also the spender for my relationship. Let's see what the article says. Being more transparent with each other is one thing. Changing lifelong spending habits is another. Simply put, sharing finances can be a real challenge when one finds comfort in saving and one finds joy in spending. That's true. I do like the way they framed that. The more frugal half of the relationship may feel that their partner is spending irresponsibly, not practicing financial mindfulness, acting materialistic, or even holding them back from buying a house or reaching other financial milestones. They may just wish their partner would think more about the future in general. I'm going to stop there and say this is that internal judgment that is really poisonous to a marriage. And I also want to call the article out. They said basically that the more frugal spouse is the natural saver, and that's not necessarily true. Just because the spender likes to spend money or gets joy out of spending, spending can still be engaging with frugality, the intentional practice of prudent economy. Spending money within itself is not anti-frugal. Spending money wisely with prudence and intentionality and in a way that maximizes your happiness or utility per dollar, that's frugal. Let's continue with the article. Meanwhile, the more spendy half of the relationship may feel that their partner is acting excessively frugal, cheap, or making fear-based money decisions. They may just wish their partner would spend a little, live a little, and enjoy some of the finer things in life before they cash in their 401k. Keeping finances separate will enable both partners to continue practicing their existing money habits largely unimpeded. This way, you can still teach your partner to save more or live a little without risking your own money and comfort in the process. This is... They were so stinking close to the truth here. They covered the emotions, the judgment that can exist between the spender and the saver. You've got the saver over here who looks at the spender and is like, you're wasting all the money. And you've got the spender over here who looks at the saver and is like, why don't you live a little? Why don't you have fun? Why can't you engage with the joy that I get when I spend? The spender loves the saver. And because the spender loves the saver, they want them to engage with the same joy and happiness they get when they spend money. And the saver loves the spender. When the saver is saving money, they feel comfort and they feel peace and they feel joy and they feel like they're getting ahead in life. And they want their spender to feel the same way. By separating finances, you're simply fostering an environment for the spender and the saver in the extreme to judge each other for managing money poorly, and they don't get to learn from each other. Beyond that, let me tell you the role of the saver and a spender in a marriage when you join finances. The saver is going to help the spender rein things in a little bit so that they can make sure that their future goals, their future needs are met. Investing for retirement is a need, and it's something that has to happen intentionally, little bits at a time, in order to be successful. And the spender needs to help the saver realize that not everything is about saving money and that there are some things it's okay to spend on today. When the spender and the saver come together and they make a budget together, they can realize, well, we are on pace. We actually have an outline for our plan in the future, and we know that we are going to be okay. And it gives you permission to spend the extra money that you have, that you don't need to be saving, that doesn't need to be going toward your needs, on wants and choice you have today. And together, the saver can help the spender make their goals in the future happen, and the spender can help them enjoy today. They get to be better together than they otherwise could be apart because they're working together and they're communicating about the inherent nature that they have that is genuinely beautiful, and the other one is lacking. They get to help each other grow in a way that doesn't exist if they're not talking about this stuff together. Their sum is greater than their individual parts on their own. And I'll be darned if I didn't learn a great deal from Amanda in the way that she manages money, the way that she is a natural saver. I learned a lot from her, and I am better because of it. I became a better version of me, and we became a better version of us because we joined finances, we ran a budget, and we worked together. We were able to take our strengths and build them up while covering up our weaknesses. If you separate accounts the way that they say here, well, goodness, that saver is almost never going to engage in fun and always is going to say, no, I got to be saving up so that I don't do this, and we're not going to go on that date. And the spender is just going to start doing stuff on their own, and they're going to be spending and spending and spending. And if they feel like I have to because I identify as the opposite of my spouse, well, they might completely neglect their future. And if you keep things separate and you get to retirement and the saver has just a massive surplus in that retirement and the spender has nothing, well, what happens at the end of that marriage if you make it to that point? And the spender's like, well, can I spend some of the money that you save for retirement? And you're like, no, you should have been planning. That's not marriage. That's not loving. Okay, we got 2 more to get through. We're on number 4 now. Number 4 is it makes separation way, way less messy. Don't cry. We're not going to cry. How do I make this one sound less blunt? Sometimes when 2 people love each other, but you see forget it. Here goes. When you break up, your partner might empty your joint bank account and disappear, or hold the money hostage. Once there's separation, people do weird things with money. Wendy, certified divorce financial planner, told Forbes this: money is one of the number 1 reasons for divorce, and it's already a source of contention that can lead to a partner emptying an account or using money as a bargaining chip. Granted, that money can typically be recouped during divorce proceedings, but if you and your partner are unmarried, there's much higher risk they'll get away with it because technically it's their money too. Under banking law, your ex became a joint owner of all your funds in the joint accounts when you told the bank to add him to the accounts, writes Bruce, a banking law attorney from Tallahassee. It goes without saying that until you trust your partner completely, it's best to keep your finances separate for the time being. Okay, I'm going to give the article props. It highlights primarily the situation where people are unmarried and they join finances. And this is something that I mentioned at the beginning of the main topic here. If you are not married and you join accounts, there's a great deal of risk because there's no legal commitment that represents, hey, we're going to stay together like there is in marriage. Not to say divorce doesn't exist, but there's nothing to stop a boyfriend or a girlfriend from just leaving. So yes, you keep things separate when you're dating or if you're unmarried. But when you're married, if you keep things separate and you say, well, if we get divorced, keeping the money separate is just going to make it easier for us to know what is yours and what is mine, and we don't have to divvy things up or mix and match. Well, what if one spouse came in with a lot more money than the other? And the one who had a lot more money is saying that. They're basically saying, the money that I've earned matters so much to me, I'm going to put it ahead of committing completely in our relationship. The problem is, diving into marriage does indeed mean that you're jumping in with everything that you got. If you put one foot in the water and you keep the other foot out of the pool and you're like, just in case I have to leave, you're leaving the door open with the intention and understanding that you want to make it an option for you in the future. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. By failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. If you are not preparing to be in the committed married relationship for the rest of your life and you're not putting everything forward, you're giving the marriage reasons to fall apart. If you want to keep your marriage together, if you want to be fully invested and find that fully known unity that is beyond description, you have to bring everything together. And yes, things get weird with money. And I don't know why, but the love of money is the root of all evil. And if you are going to love your money more than you love your spouse, what is that going to do to your marriage? We're going to get through this. We're going to get through this last one. Number 5, it protects you from your partner's bad money habits. I have a dear friend whose husband flew to Vegas for a bachelor party and gambled away $42,000 from their joint bank account. Mind you, the previous balance was $42,138. Not only did her partner's mistake wipe out 99.7% of her savings, their savings, but it also made it harder for her to pay off her car, student loans, and other bills, which in turn torpedoed her credit score. If your partner hasn't learned how to responsibly handle money or suffers from an addiction that leads to overspending, it's best to keep your accounts separate while they get the support they need to build healthier habits. Of course, having separate finances doesn't preclude you from helping them. You can help them pay for rehab or personal finance classes, help them to improve their credit score. Click here to find out how. Don't click there. Or help them establish a healthy budget, all without risking your own financial well-being. Okay, I mentioned that joint accounts works in most cases. The ones where I think separate accounts in marriage are important, where it works, is if you have someone who's diagnosably unable to take care of money, and being a gambling addict would definitely fall under that category. If you have a spouse who is addicted to gambling money, in order to save your marriage and work together, you need to engage on getting help for them to get past that addictive behavior. But what's not okay is trying to keep your accounts separate because you treasure your credit score. If you aren't paying your bills on time or you're not paying your debts on time because one of you is spending a lot of money, and it's not a mental health problem and it's not a gambling addiction that's leading to it, it is simply mismanaging money with irresponsibility because at least one of you is acting like a child and spending away the money that you need to cover your needs. Well, that is simply irresponsibility on both of your parts for not planning your money together. You got to get your act together and start writing a budget and living by it. Writing a budget doesn't make everything better. It's got to change your behavior. Writing a budget is a way for you to intentionally say no before you end up having to figure out on the fly how to say no to your impulsive desires. To the article's credit, when merging finances still makes sense. That all being said, there's still a reason why 72% of millennials and 89% of Gen Z couples have at least one joint bank account, and why roughly 4 in 5 say they don't regret the decision. Okay, that's good. That's good. I'm getting hope and faith back in humanity. Here are some cases when merging finances still makes a lot of sense. When there's a large income discrepancy, when one of you makes way more than the other, say you're an investment banker and your partner is a student, merging finances might be the best move. Couples with large income discrepancies find this to be more convenient, saving countless Venmo requests and everyday grocery runs. Yeah, I mean, keeping things separate when it's like, oh, this is my money, I'm earning this money, and the other person isn't like earning any money at all, and you're just constantly asking the spouse that makes money for money. Well, that sounds like a transactional roommate business decision and not a marriage. When kids are involved, raising a child is definitely one big shared expense, and unlike rent or a mortgage payment, it's not easily split in half once a month. That's why couples with kids end up sharing at least one account for child-related expenses, another for a college fund, or just sharing everything if one partner becomes a stay-at-home parent. We've got a couple more for joint filing benefits. Married couples who file their taxes jointly save time and money. For example, joint filers have higher income thresholds for certain tax brackets, such as the deduction for IRA contributions. Okay. For transparency and feeling of teamwork. Now we're getting to the good stuff. Sharing your finances makes it easier to see what your partner is spending on, to hold each other accountable for your goals, ding ding, and to celebrate milestones together, ding ding. My wife and I have pooled our assets together since we were first married, and we feel like a team because of it, says David, Director of Research and Investments at Atlanta's CPC Advisors. We never have friction over who should pay for this or who should pay for that. If we have a great year, we share in the success. And that is possible for pretty much every single married couple or couple that's going to be married listening to this podcast today. And that's what I want for you, because I care for you and you matter and you are deserving of that kind of relationship. The bottom line, the article wraps up. Even though most couples end up merging their finances to some degree, that doesn't make it right for everyone. If you're not sure yet, that's a good sign that you should keep them separate until you've had a long, honest, transparent convo about it. Again, getting through the heavy stuff sooner is what makes relationships last. In closing on that note, here's what I'm going to say. If you have money separate, you're simply not going to address the things that you find disagreeable with your partner's spending habits or the way that they manage money. It's going to bury the problem instead of addressing it and figuring out how to grow through those. They're not necessarily disagreements, but misalignments in your values and misalignments in your understanding of what is good and proper for money management. You're basically sweeping it under the rug. This is the same thing that happens when you don't have a budget and you're engaging with your money, even with a joint account. But keeping things separate in order to avoid a fight, to avoid butting heads where you naturally disagree, is preventing you from engaging in relationship and communication growth that is essential for your development in marriage, for you to grow closer together. When you avoid that and you kick it down the road, it becomes harder and harder and harder and harder to reconcile. So the first thing you need to figure out is, how are we going to engage in this as soon as possible so that we can reconcile the differences that we have and purge the risk of what could otherwise be the cause of a future failure in your marriage? Getting that risk out of the way and pursuing behaviors that lead to, statistically, a happier marriage. Couples who communicate on a weekly basis about money, not fighting about it, but communicate in a healthy way, are 80% likely to report being in a happy marriage. That means if you are running a budget and you have joint accounts and you're talking about this money stuff on the regular, you're probably going to be in a happy marriage. It makes a huge difference. Now, there's more that I want to say, and I can't cover everything through the podcast material that is important to know when it comes to managing money in marriage. And that's why I developed the workshop, Your Marriage, God's Word, and Money. This is a workshop that's designed to be hosted at your local church, whether I can be there in person or over video. And through this workshop, you will get all of the tools, all of the information, all of the knowledge and wisdom that you need to live out a happy and beautifully frugal marriage. This workshop is designed to help struggling marriages survive and good marriages thrive. There's nothing that you can do to empower your marriage more than purging the money fights and money problems forever. Please, if you want to engage with this workshop, share it with your local church. Go to HopeFilledFinancial.com. There you're going to find a link to the workshop, and you can send it to your church and say, this is something that is going to change marriages for the good of everyone who attends. And it's something that we should be using to support our community and help all of our marriages grow stronger together. With that, I don't know if it's going to be next week, but we're definitely going to do it in the future. I'm going to be asking ChatGPT to write a budget for me and see if artificial intelligence can replace me as a financial coach and help you with your budget. Be sure to subscribe to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast if you don't want to miss that, and especially if it's not going to be next week. And if you haven't already, please like this podcast, share it with your friends and family. Help us with our mission to spread financial literacy to everyone. And until next week, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.